Alright guys, welcome back to period 6, and in topic 6.4 we're going to cover the so-called New South. So we're going to take a break from the West and head to the South and look at how the South is changing post-Civil War. So we're looking for characteristics of the New South. Now we're going to first begin by doing some economics and look at the South and its fledgling industries. So let's first look at some obstacles to industry in the South. Why is it they couldn't build as many factories and railroads and so forth? And there were a lot of reasons. Part of this has to do with the damage inflicted by the Civil War, the fact that it had, just ripped the heart out of the South. But then there's also the issue of railroads. So the Northern railroads, they really wanted to keep the advantage with the North. So what they would do is they would give preferential rates. And what I mean by that is if you wanted to ship manufactured goods from the North to the South, that would be cheaper than trying to send manufactured goods from the South to the North. Same thing with raw materials. It was cheaper to move raw materials from the South to the North than from the North to the South. And so what this does is it helps keep the South kind of held down economically because they just simply can't compete because the shipping rates are so unfair, really, against the South. Now, if we are going to start to industrialize, though, let's think about what the South would specialize in, what they would specialize in. And you're probably thinking textiles, right? Because this, after all, is the cotton-growing part of the United States. And so as we get to about 1880 or so, we are seeing some textile mills popping up. And there are a couple of reasons for this. One, of course, you're closer to the cotton itself. So anytime you're closer to the raw material, you're going to manufacture into something that's economically more efficient. It's going to lead to higher profits. And the second reason is you have very cheap labor in the South compared to the North. So in the North, because they were more prosperous, workers could demand higher wages, and they could also unionize. But in the South, workers tend to be more desperate, and so they're willing to work for cheaper wages, which means the South is an attractive place. And so we're going to see textile mills moving from the North to the South. In fact, you can see that trend. Notice how New England versus the cotton states, there's a lot of textile production going on in New England, and then it shifts to the South. Now, we're seeing just the beginning of that and the time period we're talking about, but obviously as we get in the 20th century, it's going to shift even more. All right, another industry we could point to when we're looking at the South, of course, would be the tobacco industry, right? I mean, this goes all the way back to the days of Jamestown. Tobacco would always play a very important role in the economy of the South, here in Clarksville, Tennessee, of course, as well. And this brings us to a Southern industrialist named James Buchanan Duke. And he was the president of the American Tobacco Company, which was just a major producer of cigarettes. And he was also the co-founder of a major power company in the South called Duke Power Company. This is what makes Duke so much money, is the rolling machine. So as we get into this time period, guys, we're going to take all those machines from the Industrial Revolution, we're going to apply them to manufacturing pretty much everything, even cigarettes. And one of these machines could turn out an amazing 200 cigarettes per minute. I mean, think about that. That's over 2 cigarettes a second pouring out of this machine. And Duke made a lot of money, he did. In fact, here's his mansion. Not bad, huh? And if you're wondering, okay, Duke, I know I've heard of that before, and you're thinking, oh, Duke University. Yes, that's where it started. It's named for him. All right, let's stay on the theme of agricultural development just for a second in the South. We're looking at cotton and tobacco production. And what we're going to see is, since industry is somewhat held back in the South is going to rely on what it's always relied on, and that is agriculture. Now, since the slave labor force is no more in the South, they're going to transition to something we've already looked at in a previous unit, that is to say sharecropping and tenant farming. So you have a lot of poor farmers who are not making a lot of money and they're having to share the proceeds of their efforts and their work in the fields. And also going against them is the fact that with new techniques and technologies, the productivity is going up. So you're producing ever more crops, which means the price of those crops decline. So these poor farmers are really struggling in the South after the Civil War. All right, now, of course, we're going to look at a key topic for the so-called New South, and we're going to look at racial relations in the South. Now, we learned about the black codes when we were studying Reconstruction, and we learned that these were laws designed to basically keep the freedmen, that is to say former slaves, in sort of a second-class citizenship role. And so the black codes are going to evolve into something we know better as Jim Crow laws. And these are the laws that will be on the books in southern states all the way up until the 1950s and 60s. And what these laws are designed to do is to keep the races segregated, okay? Legal codes of segregation, separate schools and facilities. They were also embedded in these laws an attempt at voter suppression. So you might remember the 15th Amendment had given black men the right to vote. But if white Southerners didn't want black men to vote, they had to find a way to suppress that vote. So there were means of things like literacy requirements and certain voter registration laws that made it difficult for blacks to vote. And, of course, the poll tax you'd have to pay. And if you're poor and you can't pay your poll tax, well, then you can't vote. And so this is going to keep black men from voting in anywhere near the numbers that they would, in theory, be able to do. So segregation, as we talked about, is something we're going to revisit later this year as well when we get the civil rights movement. But just a couple images here to show you just how divided things were in the South. This is from 1940, guys, and what this is showing us, again, 1940, that's not really that long ago in the grand scheme of things, right? This is right before we get involved in World War II. What this is showing us is the percentage of voting age black Americans who are registered to vote. Now, being registered to vote doesn't mean you're necessarily voting. It just means you're actually able to go to the polling place and vote. And so even among registered voters, almost nobody is voting. If you were black, you weren't voting, right? I mean, 6.5% in Tennessee, 1.5% Arkansas, half of 1% in the deep, deep South. So they just simply weren't voting because they were intimidated, and there were all kinds of obstacles put in their path. Now, in addition to legal challenges, there was also the challenge of just simply surviving. The late 1800s was really the high point of lynching. Now, lynching will continue past the 1880s and 90s, but this really is the peak. And in case you're not sure what lynching is, it's basically where a mob kills somebody that they've accused of doing something wrong. So it might be that some guy has been accused of raping a woman, and rather than waiting for a trial, they go ahead and just kill him, in mob justice style. And, this is not the way we want law and order to function in America, right? We want people to have a chance to have their day in court and not to be seized by frenzied mobs and executed on the spot. And you can see the numbers here, the 1880s and 90s lynchings, hundreds per year in some of these years anyways. And you can see it's not just blacks who are being lynched. Whites were being lynched as well, although, again, not nearly in the same numbers, and certainly not per capita anywhere near black lynchings. And you can see how they're peaking here, and then they're going to fade as we get into the 20th century. And here's kind of a map showing where lynchings were occurring. And this is, again, not just something you can point to like one state and say, oh, it's just happening there. I mean, this was widespread across the South. Widespread. Now, one of the people who was doing the most to push back against lynching was a woman named Ida B. Wells. Now, she was born into slavery in the final years of slavery, so I don't know that she had any personal memories of being a slave, but it certainly left a mark on her. And she's living in the South, and she's living amongst the white population, who most of which looked down on blacks and were using legal and extra legal means of suppression for African Americans. And so she's really taking kind of a big risk here and stepping out there and challenging the status quo and going after lynch mobs, and also setting up organizations like the National Association of Colored Women. So again, this is a time period when women, white or black, were not politically active except for certain circumstances. And here she is, really breaking color and gender barriers here by going out there and becoming a spokesperson. All right, this is going to bring us now to one of the most infamous court cases in Supreme Court history. It is right up there with the Dred Scott decision for its awfulness, and it's called Plessy versus Ferguson. This takes place in 1896. Now, the Plessy in Plessy versus Ferguson was a guy named Homer Plessy, who happens to be, and this fraction actually is important. You wouldn't think it would be, but it is important. He was 1/8 black, and you're thinking, what does that even mean? Well, that means basically he's got like one great-grandfather or great-grandmother who was black, right? So he's 7/8 white, 1/8 black. But in the South this time, if you had any black ancestry in you at all, you were considered black. And so when Homer Plessy gets on this rail car in Louisiana and refuses to leave the white section and move to the so-called colored section, and is arrested for this, he is going to appeal his conviction all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court decided that, in fact, Homer Plessy's 14th Amendment of equal protection under the law, his 14th Amendment right, was not violated. And the reason is if you have separate but equal facilities, then those facilities are constitutional. Now, why is this such a horrible ruling? Because what it's doing is it's giving a legal basis for segregation. It's saying you can have separate schools, separate water fountains, separate everything, as long as those facilities are, in fact, equal. But we all know that those facilities will not be equal. But again, this is going to give the South legal cover to build up and maintain segregation for generations. And so, again, Plessy versus Ferguson is one of the all-time bad Supreme Court decisions. All right, now we're going to move on to talk about two individuals who are very important. You're going to need to know these men and their basic ideas. The first is Booker T. Washington. So Booker T. Washington was born into slavery in the 1850s. So he would have been, basically a kid when the Civil War ended, but he still had memories of this. The reason I say he was born in the 1850s is we don't know his exact birth date. He never knew. He never knew the day, the month, the year that he was born on. In fact, he didn't even know who his father was, although he suspected that it was a white man from a neighboring plantation. It's kind of like a Frederick Douglass situation in that regard, that he never knew his white father. Now, once the Civil War has come and gone, Booker T. Washington becomes a spokesperson and champion for this idea that the way African Americans are going to gain more rights and more acceptance in the South is through education. He believed education would give black Americans skills and knowledge that would allow them to eventually become accepted by white Southerners. And in pursuit of that, in 1881, he helps found a very famous black school called the Tuskegee Institute. If you've heard of the Tuskegee Airmen from World War II, they were from the Tuskegee Institute. So, he is not without his critics, however. Critics of Booker T. Washington said he wasn't doing enough to challenge white supremacy in the South, that he was sort of accommodating white supremacy and sort of accepting it, at least temporarily, to pursue educational opportunities for black Americans. And it is true that Booker T. Washington didn't come out and publicly challenge white supremacy in the way that some of his critics thought they should do. He thought rather what should happen is blacks would work their way up through American society, and they would eventually be accepted as equals if they can prove themselves in the economy. In other words, if they have skills and jobs and businesses and things like that, whites will eventually accept them. There is Booker T. Washington. There is William Howard Taft. And this is Andrew Carnegie, the famous industrialist. All right, our second person we're going to look at now is W.E.B. Du Bois. And unlike Booker T. Washington, Du Bois believed that educational opportunities and all that doesn't mean anything unless you have legal and complete authority. He never believed that whites would accept blacks until whites were forced to accept blacks. And that meant using the legal processes to break down segregation and to end white supremacy. And in pursuit of this, he helps establish an organization which is still around today. It's a very politically powerful organization called the NAACP. And that stands for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Du Bois was a big critic of Booker T. Washington. The men clashed quite a bit. Now, specifically, a thing I want you to remember about W.E.B. Du Bois was he had this idea that what should happen is the top 10% of most talented black Americans should be given full and immediate access to American society. They should be going to the best schools. They should be allowed to live in the best neighborhoods. They should be allowed to have any job they want. And once this talented tenth had proven themselves, then the rest of the black community then would follow suit, that whites would eventually just kind of see that black Americans could do everything white Americans could do, and they would eventually accept them. Now, it's really important, guys, that you know the difference between Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois, because these men and their ideas have been often included on the AP test. Having a short answer or an essay question involving their ideas is, pretty likely. All right, so that is it for our discussion of the New South, and we looked at some, preliminary industrialization in the South. We looked at some obstacles to that industrialization. We looked at some challenges facing farmers with tenant farming and sharecropping and all that stuff. We also looked at Plessy versus Ferguson and the Black Codes and Jim Crow and W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington. So make sure you look over all that stuff so you know what the New South was all about.